perspectives. Like for myself, I make decisions quickly. I tend not to get bogged down in these things, and I can communicate that in a way that's somewhat simplified. And I was like, that's my skill. I'm going to lean into that. But it took me, 30 years to discover that. And I was like, well, I'm not going to go back now. So all those, I think, were a combination that like really just encouraged me to move forward in this respect. And again, the most important part is it has continued to grow me. Like what a gift it is to go after something that is purpose driven, but it also helps grow your purpose at the same time. So it's just been great.
Case Kenny, welcome.
Hello.
So happy you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I love the enthusiasm. Makes me excited. Makes me enthusiastic.
I have so much enthusiasm. Also, I'm an hour ahead of you on Eastern time, and I can tell you that the future is looking good.
Love it. I love a glimpse into the future when I can get it. So thank you.
Anytime. Just me and Interstellar,
Love it. I love it.
Well, I am so delighted and honored and happy and all of the things to have you here with me, with us today as part of the Flourish or Fold Stories of Resilience podcast. And we're going to dive right in today. You're doing so many exciting things in your life. I don't know how I found you, but I found you on Instagram, and I was so just deeply attracted, as I'm sure, so many of your followers are, to your way of sharing messages about being uplifted, motivated, improving, being your best self, becoming your best self. And for those of you who are not following Case Kenny at Case Kenny on Instagram, please pause and go do that right now, because he's got this beautiful selection of Post-it notes and to-go latte containers, where you're sharing uplifting messages about becoming your best self. Tell us about how you thought about sharing these messages with the world. How did this style and process for communicating these messages of upliftment, how did it come to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been writing for a long time on the internet, blogging, publications, things like that. I never set out to do anything, frankly, in the like self-development space. I was kind of just led here by life and by passion and eventually by choice. But the idea of like bringing my thoughts, which is all the podcast is my thoughts. I am not studied in this. I am not learned in this. I have no qualifications other than my life experience and my perspective. But I was led to bring it to life in a certain way that I thought was relatable. And there are a dime a dozen accounts on the internet as far as quotes. Like motivational quotes are everywhere, of course, and everyone does a great job. I would never dismiss anyone who decides to post a quote in any format. But I was like, I want to connect with people on a more relatable level. And I was like, how can I bring a little bit of commonality in place? And I was like, well, what's something that everyone touches, feels, holds, touches, smells every day? I was like, well, coffee. Most people tend to drink coffee or tea or some kind of beverage. So I just started writing quotes on coffee cups. And then that honestly just kind of blew up. And then I think I live in downtown Chicago, so I have the advantage of having the beautiful landscape and cityscape here. So it's not digitized. It's me and my handwriting, which has improved a lot over the years. And I post these things and people enjoy them. And most of all, people share them. Like this week was wild because Hailey Bieber shared one of mine. And that was just kind of crazy. And I think it's just because it's like relatable content, of course, but then put in like scenarios that are, people like the city and people like coffee. And I don't know, I think it's somewhat fresh and people enjoy it. I don't know. I'm privileged to be able to do it. To have a voice, not only on a podcast, but on social media and just do it. So yeah, I never set out to do this. I just tried it one day and I've just been following it ever since.
And do you recall what the quote was that Hailey Bieber was into?
Yeah, it was a love language one about watching a show together with your partner. So I'm assuming her and Justin.
I love that. What an exciting moment for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I always say, I say I'm the most privileged guy in the world to make a living from sharing my feelings on the internet and have people support me, big and small, and everyone in between. Like you know, it's, I think I annoy some people because every podcast I'm like, thank you. And people are like, we get it, Case, you're thankful. But like, I would be remiss if I didn't repeat that over and over again. Cause I mean, it is wild. If I look at my life, 5 years ago, I was like, this is what I do for a living. I would be like, no. So, I love doing it.
Well, tell us about that arc of your life. Tell us about Case Kenny 5 years ago and Case Kenny today. And you said 5 years ago, you never would have thought that you would be here or be doing this. So talk to us about that growth trajectory and that arc for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm 33 now, live in Chicago. I was, in my 20s prior, also lived in Chicago. I started the podcast when I was 29. Prior to that, I had really no desire to like really be in the self-development space. I started the podcast in reaction to a breakup that I went through. Got out of that, and I was like, who's Case Kenny? Like, who am I outside of the relationship? Because I was very invested in the relationship. And also at the time, I had a very involved, aggressive sales job in advertising technology sales. So traveling a lot, very focused on that. It's like, who am I outside of a job? Who am I outside of a relationship? And I was like, man, I don't really know. I was like, are my goals my goals? Are my standards my standards? I don't know. I feel like I've been borrowing a lot of other people's goals and standards. So I was like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to sit down and figure it out. And I was like, I want to do it in a way, because I've always been writing. I love writing. I always have been privileged to have an audience to write for. And I was like, I am going to ask myself those types of questions and give my perspective on it in a vulnerable way. I was like, I'll do a podcast. Why not? Podcasting is in vogue. Let's do it. And that's what started me down the podcast route. And that blew up, and I was, grateful for that. But it was through that process, I was like, man, I get a lot of value out of thinking about these topics myself. Like, this is my form of therapy, and it helps other people. Like, wow, this is amazing. And then I just kept doing it. And like practice, I practice mindfulness every single day doing the podcast and writing. And it just helped me so immensely in every area of life, but particularly self-awareness. I just feel Case Kenny 5 years ago, Case Kenny today, I'm the same guy. I have the same doubts and questions and insecurities and strengths and weaknesses, but I'm aware and self-aware, and I'm honest and I'm vulnerable in that sense. And I've simplified how I look at life. And I've done that through writing and the podcast and everything in between. So kind of, honestly, again, I was just kind of led here through that process, and that's been amazing. And so ask me that question 5 years from now. I'm interesting to see what my answer would be.
I can't wait to find out.
It's going to be exciting.
One of the things that I'm struck by that you shared is the sort of compelling and catalytic power of loss or grief or something coming to an end, the exiting of a relationship. And, so often I think when a relationship or a season or something in life kind of comes to an end, it's so easy to feel like we're falling off a cliff, or our life is ending, or there's this overwhelming amount of pain, and we think, we're never going to be whole again. And one of the things I loved about what you shared in sort of this arc of your development is that this initially came out of, this new beginning for you, if you will, came out of an ending for you, and a desire to truly explore the real you, if you will, outside of the context of a relationship or a role.
Yeah. I mean, I've grown to see it that way. Absolutely. I mean, all the cliches are true. Life is about, closing one chapter, moving on to the next. The fulfillment of your life is relative to the grace with which you're willing to move on from chapters that have closed. And I've just found that to be so true. And I've come to the conclusion, of course, as many others have, that in life is about closure as much as it isn't about closure. Like, in my life, like I have just been so empowered to create my own closure for one,
Mhm.
but I've also been empowered to continue to move forward without answers. And I think a lot of people get hung up on that, like break up, something bad happens in life. And because they don't know why, or they don't have an answer, they get very hung up on that, which is human, of course. But I think life, there's the quote, I forget who said it, but you can only connect life looking back, not forward. And I've just like,
Mm.
that kind of mentality energizes me. It's like, it shouldn't, like, not having the answer shouldn't stop me from moving forward, because that's how you get the answer. And I think I used to be very caught up in that cycle of overthinking and doubt relative to any area of life. And I've just learned so much so that time is this magical linear line that is so rewarding if you're willing to follow it, not just physically but also spiritually, and looking back and be like, oh, I actually understand it now. And then to like repeat that as a thesis for your life is just like so rewarding, that it's like I don't waste time and energy hung up on things that I don't understand, because eventually I will. And that's my glass half full mentality towards life. And it's so more rewarding, and it just feels
Mhm.
good. So why wouldn't I choose that as an outlook?
Mhm. You shared something tremendously powerful just now, this concept of closure. And I think this is so important as I think about resilience and development and relationships. And I'll just wax poetic on this for a second, if that's all right.
Yes,
Um,
please.
I'm curious to know what you think about this. One of my beliefs around human development is that closure is not necessary, I think, to your point earlier, to move forward and to evolve. And
Mhm.
in fact, oftentimes it's a luxury or a privilege. And what I mean by that is living in this sort of Western society, called the United States, right? We have a lot of predictability. We're able to exert a lot of control, over our environment. And so many people in my life, and at times for me as well, and maybe for you and people have said, I can't move on. I need to get closure, right? And my experience with this has been, we don't need to get closure. We decide when it's closed. And there's people that are going back into toxic relationships, re-traumatizing themselves, getting back with people that aren't, good for them, or coming, back into those relationships to try to get free, you know. And so I think there's this moment where closure can actually work against us. And if we start to think about closure as being a luxury or a privilege, not a necessity, how does that change the game?
I think it totally changes it. I mean, I am so in line with what you said. I talk a lot about closure, and like my little soundbite is closure is not a team sport in any sense.
I
And
love that. Closure is not a team sport. Well done,
yeah,
you.
and but I think as humans, to your point, predictability, we assume it is. That's the starting point.
Mhm.
And it's the craziest thing in the world. But again, I get it. We're to blame, but we're not to blame. Humans we're wired. Whoever wired us, we need to talk to that person, because we're in a strange place with our compulsions sometimes. But it's like, to your point, we're willing to go back to the people who hurt us to find closure. But it's almost like when your mentality is that closure is a team sport and that you need closure to move forward, you're almost waiting for someone else's permission to give you closure. Like realistically, that looks like one last chat with your ex, getting quote on the same page as your ex. Those are things where you're literally, by connotation, you're asking for permission to create closure. Whereas, the whole closure process is 100% an output of your effort and your effort alone. How you do that, well, I think that's relative to everyone. But I think you combine that mentality with the mentality that in life, nothing is binary. Nothing is truly yes or no, black or white, good guy, bad guy, whatever it may be. And I think we forget that a lot of the times. We think that to move forward, we need to be completely healed. to move forward, to date again, we need to completely insert adjective here. And I think the reality of life is nothing is ever going to be that simple. I wish it was. And for the people who have secured that, I think that's amazing. But like, we have to decide when we're ready to a point. That could be the moment you decide that, okay, I have unanswered questions, but I am going to create this closure so that I can move forward. It's all relative. But yeah, I think the moment you separate yourself from the involvement of someone else in the closure process is the moment that you actually create it yourself. So it's like a 1-2 punch that I think could be very, very helpful. So very in line with what you're saying.
Yeah. It's like you take your closure back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
Did we do
exactly.
that? Did that just happen?
We did it.
Take our closure back. I love it. Okay. So the central question here, right, for our podcast about resilience is really about the catalytic impact that challenge, change, and complexity has on all of us. And so as you think about your life, could you tell us about a time when you faced a challenge that has now significantly formed you into the person that you are today?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll skip over the breakup one because that's an easy one. I mean, I would say just in general, like with what I do, right? Like I used to have one toe in the water, one toe out, because as a man, like I'm never one to buy into like the toxic masculinity widespread epidemic. Like that's not really my vibe. But I always think in my life about like what held me back. And, being like my job is to literally be sensitive and share my feelings and be vulnerable and do these things that I think historically I was made fun of. Even like my close friends would like throw shade at me for these things, and like no harm on them necessarily, but like that always like held me back, both creatively, passionately, purpose wise, everything like that. So I think just like deciding to go all in on something that one is inherently vulnerable as a mission, but two, as a business, to be like, I'm going to make a living from sharing quotes on the internet and voicing my feelings. Like, get out of here. Like, no way. I come from a background of like very, like sales background, like tough people who love money and wealth creation and like type A-ness, and like to like depart from that to be like, I'm going to go, share my feelings is it's not only easy to be judged by others, but judge myself in that process. And I was very in my head about that for a long time. So I always say I'm an average guy. I like house music, lifting weights, Chipotle, going to the club. Like still, like I'm still immature in some sense. So like for me to like go on a departure from
can we discuss how much I just loved that list?
That's me in a nutshell. Pretty simple.
I love that Chipotle made the list.
Oh yeah, I love Chipotle. Well, that's just a testament to how simple I am. I eat Chipotle every day, so I'm not like this like enlightened palate type individual. But yeah, I would say just making that decision to do that, and like like along the way, it's like in any field where you're a creator or influencer, don't like the word, but in any field where you're creating value for other people and building up influence, you often find yourself in major imposter syndrome area, particularly in like educational fields or self-development. It's like, am I actually the guy I portray myself to be? Do I do the things I talk about? And I think deciding one, to go all in on doing these things, but then also by way of that being like, okay, I am willing to be awkward and embarrassed and all these things, but I'm now sure as hell not going to not be the person I portray myself to be. So it's like just been this really like rewarding experience. It wasn't like particularly, I didn't have to like overcome haters or like massive downs or anything, but it's like a very large mentality shift towards resilience in a sense, creatively and passion wise and purpose wise and identity wise as well. Like there's nothing more fulfilling than being able to practice what you preach and preach what you practice and like make that a life. And I'm grateful to be able to do that. But it wasn't easy to transition into that. And yeah, it's been so rewarding, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
What was that process like for you, Case, when it sounds like you noticed that there are aspects of you that are very different from the mentality that you grew up, around, to be sensitive and to feel your feelings and to share your feelings, right? So already you're kind of maybe on the fringe of the people that you're around. You're, couple degrees different than they are. And I think, in those moments, we all kind of have this inflection point where we're like, am I gonna like take my own path, or am I gonna like get back on the road, get back in the fray with everybody
Mm.
else? So how did you make that decision to continue on your own path, to like amplify your your difference, your gifts? And did you have role models for that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, I would say the easiest answer was, I just like, I'm big on cause and effect. Like, personally, like, trying this has helped me immensely. So first I was like,
Mm,
okay, well, I've got to be onto something here. And then two, the feedback of other people, as much as I don't think you should necessarily do things in life based solely on the praise of other people, it was very helpful. Like, having so many people be so incredibly kind to me and supportive of me was like, man, well, I got to be doing something right if all these people listen and support and buy and all these things. So I was like, okay, man, maybe I'm onto something there. But I mean, I think ultimately, it was like, I was just like, I, I'm a very stubborn, like, type A person. I was like, I want to do what I want to do in life. What do I enjoy doing? I enjoy speaking, I enjoy music, and I enjoy writing. Like, even like the music aspect of what I do, like, very, like, was awkward to like consider doing. I do these things. I have a radio show called Zen Disco, where I mix together house music and mindfulness. And the reason that I've always wanted to do that was I love EDM music. I love dance music. I always used to be the Tool with their shirt off at Lollapalooza, doing like EDC, going to those shows. And I was like, man, I love music. Why can't I combine this with my stuff? And I just one day I said, screw it. And I did it. And, I was like, man, I'm going to get like all the, like, the labels and the artists that I want to work with are going to think it's so silly. And I just went and I did it. And just to see the support of people, even if it was like one person, just like changed everything for me. Just like the support of people. Like, it is cheesy to say, but like, that is what convinced me that my words have impact. And I think everyone's been given a skill in life. I genuinely do. I think for
mm,
me, for a long time in my 20s, I struggled with that idea because I always used to think that skills were these overt talents. Great
mm,
athlete, savant IQ, Mensa member, great with numbers, whatever it is. I like, those are skills. And I was like, man, I don't have any of that. I'm a pretty average guy. But then what I came to realize is I do have a skill. My skill is to simplify perspectives. Like, for myself, I make decisions quickly. I tend not to get bogged down in these things, and I can communicate that in a way that's somewhat simplified. And I was like, that's my skill. I'm going to lean into that. But it took me, 30 years to discover that. And I was like, well, I'm not going to go back now. So all those, I think, were a combination that like really just encouraged me to move forward in this respect. And again, the most important part is it has continued to grow me. Like, what a gift it is to go after something that is purpose driven, but it also helps grow your purpose at the same time. So
mm.
it's just been great. I mean, I'm very impatient too. So for me to be like at 30 years later, but here we are.
Here we are. Look at
Yeah.
that. You said something that was fascinating to me earlier when you talked about this kind of 5-year arc for you, doing and being in a place that's very different from anything that you had imagined. And you said something to the effect of like, here I am 5 years later, I'm doing what I love. I'm still the same person. I still have the same insecurities. I still have the same, I don't know if you said hangups, right? But that kind of general
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
And I was curious to know, in some of my conversations this week with coaching clients and in the context of workshops, I've heard a lot of this idea of like people putting in the work to change something, right? Whether that's to heal trauma or abandonment or loss, or to show up in a different way in relationships or as a leader. And I've been hearing a lot from people like, I've been putting in the work to do this, and I'm and here it is again, right? here I am apologizing again. Here I am grappling with my worthiness again. And so when you said, here I am, I still have the same insecurities, I've amplified, I've grown, I've matured, and there's some things that have not changed in an appreciable way. I was curious to know your perspective on this idea of like doing the work, and do those things sort of have the capacity to go away? Do they ever go away?
Yeah. Well, I'd love your perspective on that too, because I think that's your area. I think for me, it's like I definitely believe in the power of change. Absolutely, people think people can change. I think it can take a long time, certainly, to quote undo habits and perspectives and assumptions you've held for a long time. But I think for me, it's my growth has been about balance. It's been about, okay, here's an insecurity I have, here's a doubt I have, here is the balancing side of that equation spiritually for me. And I think the balance is what has helped me be able to be like, oh, okay, here's that insecurity coming up again. But wait, I remember this. And this is a fact that I've learned about myself, and it balances it. And I think that's a big truth about life. It's similar to closure. It's like, you don't snap your fingers and have closure. You don't snap your fingers even through years and years of work potentially and rid yourself of an insecurity. But what you do is you introduce new variables into the equation that balance it. Like I did an episode the other week on this idea of facts versus feelings. A feeling is an insecurity, a doubt, something that is usually temporary in its insistence on, occupying your brain. A truth is something that you refuse to negotiate and waver upon. And those are things that can take a long time to learn. But inner work, self-awareness, mindfulness is about establishing those truths. I deserve this. I am capable of this. I am worthy of this. And when you come up with a list of truths, though, that's the balance that I'm referring to, that balances out an insecurity. It doesn't rid the insecurity. Because frankly, I think I would be unqualified to say, here's how you rid yourself of an insecurity. I think that comes with time. I think it comes with experience. But all I know is that in your 20s, 30s, 40s, I think the solution is arming yourself with more truths that have come through the perspective and experience you have. And if you keep those in your pocket, in the back of your mind, anytime that habit comes up, that is a self-defeating habit, toxic habit, and insecurity, you have that as balance. And I think balance is the key to everything. So that's what I think. I think you ask me that in 5 years, I'll have a more nuanced answer, but I think balance has been what I've learned about myself, being the same guy, still the same things generally, but I'm very quick to be able to say, no, that is a feeling. Here are the facts. And I present them in my mind, and the facts usually win.
I love it. It's a beautiful description.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense in my mind. I mean, it's like I still feel imposter syndrome all the time. Like, who am I? Who am I to give advice on dating as a non-married person? Who am I to give advice on happiness as someone who is happy and then not happy, happy and then not happy? Who am I to do these things? Who
are you not to do these things?
But exactly, and that's what I come back to. I come back to facts like that. I come back to facts like I've been given a talent. I owe it to myself to express it. I owe it to my goal in life, which is just to be proud of myself. In a moment where I doubt myself, so much so that imposter syndrome is trying to convince me not to do a podcast, not to do an interview, not to do something, I'm like, am I going to be proud of myself by giving into that? Well, heck no. Mm-hmm. And all that is mindfulness, and in effect, all that is self-awareness. But I think in the past, and what a lot of us suffer from, in a sense, with quotes, is we don't have that self-awareness. So when we're struck with something like that, we confuse honesty with a fact. We confuse a moment of vulnerability with facts. Like we're like, okay, today I feel unlovable. And we're like, well, man, I've never been that honest with
you. Feel unlovable?
No. Hypothetical.
No,
hypothetical.
I know. I was like, oh no, we got it.
I feel very, very capable of being loved.
Oh, good.
But it's like, today I'm feeling unlovable. We confuse the fact that we're being honest with ourselves about that feeling, which is great because sometimes we aren't honest, but we confuse honesty with a fact where it's like you could feel something, but have it not be true. And I think that differentiation is what is very, very helpful. So that's why growth is confusing. It's like, well, I'm being honest. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? I'm like, yes, but you have to check your honesty with the facts. And if you haven't sat down to write them down and learn them, then yeah, it's going to be confusing. So it's self-awareness is the key to everything. I hate to oversimplify, but I genuinely think so.
Well, that's your superpower, simplification, right?
I absolutely believe that.
One of them.
Yeah, it's definitely one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I love everything that you're saying, and I'll just add on to what you're saying in part because you asked. For me, when I studied psychology, a helpful framework was this idea of state versus trait. Have you heard of this?
I have not. I'd love to learn about it.
So in personality psychology, you're kind of like enduring personality, right? There's this concept of state versus trait. So a trait is something that's pretty stable and consistent over time. You said something early, I'll just use this as an example. You said, like, I'm an impatient person, right? I'm a generally happy person. Those might be things that you think about as being a trait. Some days you might be more impatient, some days you might be a little less patient, more patient. Yeah. And then some days you might be happy or less happy, right? But generally over time, that's going to kind of like average out to a trait of your personality.
Right.
A state is something that happens, in kind of a defined period of time that's like a blip on that trait radar. So if you're generally happy, generally confident, but one day somebody wakes up feeling unlovable, right? You're in sort of a state of feeling unlovable. You recognize that this probably doesn't happen every day. So you haven't adopted this trait of like, I am unlovable, right? But today I'm not feeling so lovable, right? And that is another, I think, helpful element to that conversation.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's a much more eloquent way to describe facts and feelings. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I love facts and feelings. I think facts and feelings are super solid, right? Because it's knowing the difference between, you probably said this in your podcast, sometimes we state feelings as facts. I feel that you are a jerk, I don't feel that way, but we say our feelings as though they're facts, right? Yeah. And sometimes when we learn not to believe in ourselves or not to trust ourselves when we're growing up, we state facts as feelings.
Yep.
So we get them confused. So I love that differentiation. Trait and state has been helpful.
Yeah.
And the other one for me that comes through a lot, this was the very first thing they taught us when I started my master's program in marriage and family therapy, not to wax psychology on you. They taught us content and process. And that was just like life-changing for me. So in a conversation with you and I, content is what I say, right? It's the general message, I'll give a silly example. The sentence, "You bought her flowers," right? That's the content of my message. The process is how I say it. You bought her flowers. You bought her flowers, right? See, the content's the same.
Yeah.
All I did was change the process.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I think that eludes people in couples relationships because it's like, well, I only shared my feelings, or I only shared facts, or, what I said was, and we get confused between this idea of the content of our message and the process of our message, how we say it.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah. I mean, I think in social dynamics that understanding is everything, but also in relationship to ourselves. Like sometimes we have habits of that process that I think we can very much misinterpret because we're not that in touch with ourselves, self-awareness wise. But yeah, I think we're complicated people. Like we could have the content locked, or the process, like I don't know. Like I just think, I think always being able to check ourselves versus something that is static. And hopefully that static thing is a statement of facts, is a statement of of traits, is a statement of something that you have dug into and learned from. Like I talk a lot on my podcast about the idea of standards, and like the question I always get is like, am I being too picky, or are these standards legit or whatever? And I always say it's like, I think a standard becomes a standard, and a standard becomes powerful and true to you if it's based on a life experience. Like you can look back in your life and say, here's where I got that standard. It came from an experience that likely was something they were not deserving of. Someone mistreated them, overlooked them, whatever it may be. My standard came from that. And that's when it becomes a fact. And that's when it becomes static and true in your life, versus something where we're borrowing other people's standards and facts and perspectives. Like I think it's great to be inspired by a conversation like this. I think it's great to be inspired by my quotes, other people's opinions, whatever it may be. But it has to end there. We can't borrow what they say as our truth. Our truth has to come from hopefully our experience, or some very earnest, intentional self-awareness practice where we really logic through something to arrive at a conclusion. And that's where it becomes real. So it's like, it's very easy to say something and misinterpret it ourselves. But if we have that list of facts that are derived from experiences that are personal in our lives, like the connection becomes very clean, versus like, oh yeah, I've always been told that I should want someone who understands me. Oh yeah, that's a standard or whatever. Versus here's an experience where I dated someone who didn't understand me, who refused to understand me. And here's why that is my standard. And here's why that's my truth. And then here's why I refuse to negotiate on it. So I think there's just such a strong conviction connection between experiences and facts. And we have to draw that line. And if we lose sight of that, that's where we start to confuse ourselves, for lack of a better word.
I love that. What advice do you have, Case, for people who have identified a standard, say, but now they're in a position in a relationship where that standard's not being met or being challenged? What happens? What do folks do in that moment?
Well, I mean, I'd throw the easiest advice out, which is communication towards it. Obviously, I mean, something can't get better or addressed unless you address it, of course. And again, but to our whole conversation, it's like, if someone isn't respecting your standard, for instance, well, it begs the question: have you made that standard clear, for one? And then two, the other question is, okay, you made it clear, but let's practice a little bit of empathy, for instance. And I always do this, because it's like, a lot of times people's actions don't align with their intentions. Of course, like let's take a woman is dating a man, for instance, or they just went on a date. They went on a first date. It was fantastic. Both were eager, honest, open. Everything looks great. But then the guy doesn't text her for a week. And she's like, oh my gosh, here's this guy. I thought he was great, but he's really just another guy being another dude. Okay, that could be true. That could be true. Boy, we practice empathy in that sense. Like, okay, we have transparency into his life now. Well, it turns out that a couple months ago, he went on a date with a woman. It was great. It was fantastic. They're open, they're eager, they're honest. And the next day he texted her and was like, I had such a great time. I feel like we have a really great connection. Let's go out again soon. And that woman turned around and shamed him and said, oh my gosh, you're so thirsty. Get out of here. No, we did not. Like, this is horrible. You misread the room. I never want to talk to you again. And that broke him in a sense. And
I feel sad for him.
Yeah, it's soup. I'm going over the top with, I hope no one would do that. But here we have this guy now who is a little confused about how to express himself. So the next time it comes along, he's like, well, I'm not going to text her because she might feel the same way. So he doesn't act on it. His intention and his actions are a little bit misaligned in that sense, because of the way that he's been socialized. So that might be true. It might not be true. But I think asking yourself, one, have I made the standard clear? And two, have I asked questions in a way to get into a zone of empathy to truly understand? And I think if you've done those both things, then you can move forward in a way that is either honoring of you or not, but hopefully you wouldn't do not. But I think those two steps are so important before we arrive at a he's wrong, she's wrong, I'm right. They're like villainizing people until we've done those things. So that would be my advice.
I love that advice. I'm taking notes on your advice too. I will do more of this. Yes. So folks are out in the dating world. You're out in the dating world. How over time with these, I don't know, I'm going to call it like maybe a series of infractions or something, or hurts or betrayals or disappointments. I'll ask for you personally, if that's okay. And then if you want to expand it to like people, right? How do you continue to show up with an open heart and not allow this to change you or make you bitter?
Yeah. Well, I think it's tough because again, our human reaction is to pick winners and losers, bad guys and truths and statements about the observations we make. My whole thing when it comes to disappointing dating experiences, letdowns when it comes to relationships, is it's all about the narrative you decide to tell yourself. Like whether you believe in God, you're faith-based, your universe-based, your manifestation law of attraction-based, you believe in karma, whatever it is you believe. I think, you have to construct a narrative that rewards what you want versus what you don't want. And it's as simple as, are you repeating a story that says, because I've been through all these bad dating experiences, therefore all men are dishonest, no one on dating apps is serious, no one's ready for a relationship, and no one understands me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and those could be observations you've had that are frustrating. But is that the truth you've arrived at? Is that the narrative you're repeating? Well, if so, it's like I find it hard to believe that then we expect to repeat a fact about life that we've come to and then expect a different outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we're far departing from anything that's based in science necessarily. But it's like you like the law of attraction and manifestation is real in a sense that you have to tell yourself what's possible and what you deserve. Like we have to shift the narrative from all like disappointing experiences to one of here's what I deserve. If that's a simple choice to be made instead of being like, oh man, no one is honest, for instance, shifting a narrative from that to I deserve someone who is honest, and then keeping your eye on the ladder. I'm not saying it's going to flip a switch and you're going to find that person, but there's a total mentality shift when you switch from a narrative of talking about what you don't want versus a narrative of what you do want and what you do deserve. And I just found it so much easier to downslide into the story, into the narrative about what you don't want, because it's backed by experiences, which likely haven't been that great. It takes a strong person, self-aware person, to be able to observe things, but then turn it into a more redeeming story. And that's my advice. Because you think about life, like the purpose of life, frankly, is to go through what you don't want in order to get to what you do want. Isn't that
Did you
what
just tell us the purpose of life? Did that just happen?
I just rubber stamped it.
That just happened.
I believe that is the purpose of life.
The purpose of life is drum roll.
It's to go through what you don't want in order to get to what you do want. Like to think that we're going to get to something that is worthwhile and long lasting and life changing without going through the opposite of it is a little misplaced. We would all love that. It'd be so great if you didn't have to get broken up with and your heart broken or cheated on in order to find that person who wouldn't do those things. But I don't think that's the reality of life. And it's the same with like any like creative endeavor. Like how do you find what you're passionate about and your purposes in life? Well, you got to do things that you're not passionate about first. I don't see any other way, like to stumble upon these things that are life changing. And I do believe the cliches are true. I think like some things in life are worth waiting for, and so on and so on. So that's why I think during those in between periods of time, you have to come up with a narrative that supports keeping your head up rather than giving into the negatives. Because it's the same thing. It's like don't think about a yellow car. You think about a yellow car immediately. You keep telling the universe no one's honest. Well, then you're going to continue to spot evidence that supports that fact. And eventually you're just going to get in a very dark place emotionally. So I'm going off, but that's my answer. It's you have to come to a more redeeming, you have to encourage yourself to tell a more redeeming story. And that's absolutely a choice, and it's not easy. And I try to practice as much empathy as possible, but it is a choice that no one can take from you. As much as someone can hurt you and disappoint you and betray you, that's always a choice that you could tell yourself. And you call it optimism if you want, but I really do believe that it will eventually give you the outcome that you deserve.
I love that. It's absolutely beautiful. Can I tell you, Case, my most horrific dating story?
Please.
Okay. So I was under the impression that my most horrific dating stories were behind me when I turned 40, but they were not. So here,
I don't know why I think that's so funny.
so my most horrific dating story, to give you and folks out there hope, occurred right before I met my husband. So sometimes I think you get the worst. It's like sort of the worst thing, like blows everything up. And it for me, it was this moment where I was like literally and sort of like figuratively looking at myself in the mirror and being like, do I want to keep going with this?
Yeah.
You know? And I decided I did. And then I met my husband. That was, and for me, I think it was this moment of like the universe saying like, all right, Taryn, like, how much do you want this? How much are you willing to believe? How much are you willing, to your point, to flip the narrative and to tell yourself the story about what you do want versus what you don't? Here's my most horrific dating story. I started dating a man in early 2020, right as sort of COVID things were kicking off and we were going into quarantine. And he was still traveling for work from the East Coast out to the West Coast and back. And at one point in our 90-day relationship, I had said to him that I was very afraid that he would like contract COVID and be unable to come home, like be stuck in a hotel room somewhere, be sick, and I wouldn't be able to like see him or talk to him or help him. And that was scary for me. So we broke up after about 90 days. And we did this thing that couples sometimes do. You might have done this, where we were still kind of talking to each other, even though we were broken up. And he was traveling to New Orleans for a photo shoot with his company and called me after the photo shoot was over and said that he felt sick, sick to his stomach, some gastrointestinal stuff. I won't burn all of our time with this story. Anyway, he gets successively worse in this hotel in New Orleans. Can't talk, having some breathing problems. Come to find out, one of the film directors on the shoot tested positive for COVID a few days after the shoot. So we're not together, but I'm so worried for him. I'm so frightened for him. And I have a solid amount of intuition, as I would suppose you do. And one night when I was getting ready for bed, the intuitive voice in my head said, this was, say, a Saturday night, said, this guy is not in a hotel in New Orleans. And I said, what? What did you say, my intuition? Hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
He's not in a hotel in New Orleans. He's not even sick. He's at home in his house telling you he's sick because he knows that that's your greatest fear. And he's mad you broke up with him and he's going to make you pay for it. And I was like, come on, my intuition. You have got to be kidding my intuition. I was like, I swear to God. So I go to bed Saturday night. I can barely sleep. I wake up Sunday morning. I text him. I call him. Hey, I'm really worried about you. We haven't spoken. You say you're really sick. Can you please text me back? Maybe give me a call. Could we FaceTime? Like, I'm just like, could this be happening? Is he okay? And did I make this all up in my head? So Sunday night, I decide to drive out to his house. Like a crazy person, I feel. Under the cover of darkness.
Of course.
To see if he is in fact in this home where he lives. If the lights are on. He lives alone. Lived alone at the time. Sure enough, Case Kenny.
Oh no.
This guy was on his couch with the fireplace on, Netflix, candles lit, This typical MO. By himself. And I was just like, you have got to be kidding me. He is pretending to be in New Orleans sick and he is home safe in his house.
Wow.
So I text him from his front door. And I was like, I'm so sorry that you're feeling sick. When do you think you might be coming home? And I had this like bag that was really important to him with some possessions inside. And so I went out to my car and I got the bag and a book of matches. No, I'm just kidding about the book of matches. I'm kidding about the book of matches. Just the bag. And I put it on his front doorstep and I drove away.
Wow.
And that's the craziest thing that's ever happened to me in a dating relationship. And to your point, bringing this full circle, I had this moment where I was like, what the heck? This is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me in a relationship, not to use crazy in a negative way or with any stigma or connotations. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. This is like crappy as heck. And I had this conversation with myself where I was like, you going to allow this guy to stop you from going after what you want? You going to allow this instance to derail you from your dreams and hopes of having the soulmate partnership? You going to make this about you, Taryn, when it was very clearly about him?
Yeah.
And I kept going.
Wow. That's a great story for one. That's incredible. That's a up there story as far as dating horrors go. But I love the conclusion you arrived at, for one. I think it's helpful to like get a little competitive and protective of yourself. You're like, oh yeah, really? You're gonna let that guy not only occupy real estate in my mind, but change my standard of what I deserve. Like, I respond very well to like tough talk. Now, I know not everyone does, of course, but I'm that kind of guy who's like, oh yeah, well, watch this. Like, I did so the other day on, is it your loss or their loss? In that instance, most clearly it is his loss.
It was always their loss.
It always is, of course.
Answer,
and I'm not
it
one
is
to like,
always their loss.
I'm not like one to like pit people against each other, but like in an instance where someone does something overtly wrong, or in an instance where someone chooses to overlook you or whatever it may be, we have to draw that line. And hopefully that once that line is drawn, where we come back full circle here to the truths, to the facts, to the traits, rather than the feelings there. So that's a great that's a great story there that I will remember and refer to in my mind when thinking of those things. So that was great.
Nutty as heck. All right, enough about me, more about you. You talk about, this will be our last question here, because I know you got a jam. You talk about single being a superpower, yet many people feel single is very far, perhaps diametrically opposed to being a superpower. Can you tell us how we harness the superpower of being single?
Yes, I can. So I wrote a book by the title. That's kind of like my tagline. The whole idea is that we need to rid ourselves of the stigma you just described, which is a stigma that can both be true and not true. On the not true side, we're borrowing pressure from parents, from media, from culture, that not having a partner means you're lacking. Not having a partner means you're falling behind. Borrowed. In our own life, okay, you genuinely don't want to be single. You're the type of person who wants a partner. And I would never shame anyone for wanting that and wanting to not be single, because being single is a state that they'd rather not be in. Totally get that. But I think overlooking the time when you're single is a mistake. I do this exercise and I'm big on like linear lines, right? You're here, the future is here. Looking forward in order to look back. I do this exercise with my parents, older generations, anyone I can get my hands on that's older. And I always ask them, I always do an exercise of, what do you regret in life? And I listen to the answers because I love hearing the answers. And amongst those answers, I have never heard a single person in my life in this practice say that they regret being single. I've never heard anyone say that. Like, the things that you regret in a relationship are staying in a relationship that is toxic, being in a relationship where someone doesn't understand you, committing to someone you know is beneath you, whatever it may be. It's relative to the wrongdoings rather than just the state of being single, the state of not having what you want. And that might not help you feel any less lonely in the moment, But I think it's a mentality on top of which you could build, again, that idea of hope and vision for the future. I wrote all these different kinds of things, like what to use your single time for. Like, being single is the time to come up with your list of standards, traits, red flags, all that kind of stuff, so that when you do go out, you could do so intentionally, without ambiguity, and you know what you're looking for, in a sense, and you could generally be intentional about identifying it. But to think that being single is a reflection of lack, is a reflection of unlovability, I think we need to really reset ourselves on that. So that's my whole thing. I really do think it's a superpower, because what is a superpower? A superpower is the ability to tap into something that is uniquely you. And in dating, what is uniquely you is your standard, it's your vision, it's your hope, it's all that combined. And I just think it's an incredible time to identify that and put it into the fact column and operate from there. So that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I'd love to add on to what you're sharing, if it's all right, is also being in a moment of possibility and choice. Like, as uncomfortable as it can be to be single and to be wanting or hoping for a different state, to find that partner, and to be in that partnership, singlehood also reflects this tremendous opportunity for possibility, for choice, for an array and a variety of opportunities and exploration. I think that's so often overlooked.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll put the exclamation mark on that. It's like we have all kinds of proof in our life that life can go from good to bad, right? You're dating someone, they break up with you. Boom, example. And we believe that truth. Man, life really can go from 100 to 0 fast. If we have proof of that, why can't we believe the opposite? That life can go from 0 to 100 fast? Why can't we believe tomorrow could be the day? Why can't we believe that the next date we go on could be the person? Why can't we believe the inverse of the things we have evidence for? And I think open yourself to that, opening yourself to possibility, really is the key to, again, keeping your head up, engaging with the purpose of life, and moving in that direction. And that's a direction that's supported by your facts. It's a direction that's supported by the narratives that you continue to tell yourself, or the universe, or whoever you direct it towards. So absolutely.
Beautiful. Well, you've got so many amazing things going on, Case. You've got a hosted show entitled New Mindset Who Dis, quite possibly the best title of any show I've ever heard in my whole darn life.
Wow.
You've got Zen Disco. I bought one of your journals, and
Thank you
Single
so
is Your
much.
Superpower today. I'm so excited. You've got candles. So tell us about where we can find you and how we can keep soaking up this delicious goodness of what you're bringing to the world.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's just case.kenny on Instagram, newmindsetwhodis.com for journals, for candles. And yeah, the podcast is called New Mindset Who Dis. But I love what I do, and I appreciate anyone who supports it or listens. But thank you so much for having me on. It means a lot.
Oh, well, it means a lot to me too. What an incredible light you are to the world. I love that you didn't take the path more often traveled. And I admire your wisdom. I admire your grit. I admire your journey. And I've so loved learning from you.
Well, thank you. Well, likewise. I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you so much.
Me too. Me too. Take good care. Bye for now.
Bye.